It started as just another summer flight, a quiet Tuesday afternoon, with a boy in a gray hoodie seated in 14A. Nobody noticed him, just a 17-year-old sipping music through his headphones. But then a sharp voice cut through the cabin. A request about a bag turned into humiliation. A bottle of water became a public spectacle. Passengers watched, unaware they were seconds away from witnessing the most shocking mid-air twist of the year. Because this boy wasn't ordinary. And when he finally reached for his phone, the call he made would shake an entire airline to its core. Nathan Cole boarded Aureus Air Flight 927 like any other teenager might. Hood pulled over his head, headphones resting around his neck, and a gray backpack slung casually over one shoulder. At 17, Nathan had perfected the art of invisibility in public. He moved down the aisle with a quiet confidence, taking his seat in 14A without drawing attention. Or so he thought. Victoria Hayes, the lead flight attendant, had been scanning the cabin like a hawk. 20 years of service had sharpened her into someone who didn't see passengers as customers but as potential complications. Her eyes stopped on Nathan, the hoodie, the slouched posture, the way he didn't immediately tuck his backpack away. To her, it wasn't just a boy settling in. It was a problem waiting to happen. "Sir, your bag," she said sharply, voice carrying just enough to draw a few glances. Nathan looked up, surprised by the tone. He calmly slid the backpack fully under the seat, a polite nod in her direction. No argument, no fuss, just quiet compliance. But Victoria lingered. There was something about him she didn't like. Maybe it was his age, maybe the hoodie, maybe just the way he didn't scramble to explain himself. She moved on, but her eyes flicked back more than once. Across the aisle, a man in business class attire shifted slightly, his gaze brushing past Nathan before returning to his tablet. It was a moment so small no one noticed. Except Nathan. His pale blue eyes narrowed just slightly before he refocused on the window. In his front hoodie pocket, unseen by everyone else, was a small metal card. It looked ordinary to the untrained eye. Brushed steel, smooth edges, no visible logo. But to those who knew, it wasn't just a card. It was access. The boarding continued. Passengers stowed their bags, phones buzzed, and overhead bins thudded shut. Nathan remained still, quiet, as if he were just another face in the crowd. But the faintest shift in his posture suggested he'd already marked every detail of the cabin. The positions of the crew, the expressions of nearby passengers, the rhythm of the flight. Victoria passed again, her expression tight. "Phone to airplane mode, please," she said, glancing at his device, even though it already was. Nathan simply tilted the screen toward her, showing the tiny airplane icon, then returned it to his pocket without a word. A faint tension settled over row 14. Nothing dramatic, just the subtle prickling sense that this flight was going to be anything but routine. Nathan leaned back, headphones in place, eyes half closed. From the outside, he looked like a boy zoning out before takeoff. But beneath the calm surface, the first crack in the day had formed. And with it, the opening moves of a flight that no one on board would ever forget. The cabin settled into the pre-takeoff lull, that familiar hush before the engines roared to life. Nathan kept still, the hum of background chatter fading behind his music. But Victoria Hayes was not done with him. As she made another pass through the aisle, her sharp eyes once again landed on 14A. "Headphones off for safety briefing," she said, her voice louder than necessary. Nathan slipped them down obediently, resting them around his neck. He didn't roll his eyes, didn't sigh, didn't resist. It was as if every word she threw his way dissolved before it could hit. Moments later, she returned, her tone clipped again. "Sir, just making sure. Your phone stays on airplane mode." Nathan didn't even look irritated this time. He simply held the phone up again, screen aglow with the airplane icon, then placed it back on the tray. She moved on without acknowledgement. The contrast was impossible to miss. As she approached the older woman in 14B, her tone softened, a dazzling smile breaking across her face. "Can I offer you a pre-departure water, ma'am?" she asked warmly. The woman accepted, delighted, the exchange as smooth as polished glass. Nathan sat quietly, noting the difference. His expression didn't change, but a faint chill settled in his eyes. In 15C, directly behind Nathan, a man in an unassuming navy jacket shifted slightly. His phone, angled casually toward the window, was recording, not Victoria's behavior, but the moment Nathan had opened his hoodie pocket earlier. He had caught a glimpse of the brushed metal card. His expression was unreadable, but there was a certain alertness now in the way he sat. Victoria continued down the aisle, tending to other passengers with practiced cheer. But she circled back again when the drink service began. "Beverage for you?" she asked Nathan, the cheer gone from her tone. "Just a bottle of water, please," Nathan replied, his voice calm. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Cups only on this flight. Company policy." Nathan didn't argue. "A cup is fine." She poured it briskly, placing it on his tray with a slight thud. Again, she turned to the woman in 14B, offering her a sealed bottle without hesitation. The small injustices stacked quietly, one on top of another. Nathan didn't speak, didn't react. But the atmosphere in row 14 had shifted. The woman in 14B glanced uncomfortably between them. Behind him, the man in 15C tapped something into his phone. Nathan leaned back, sipping the cup of water slowly. On the surface, he was still the quiet boy in a hoodie, but the subtle current in the cabin was changing. And somewhere, just beyond Victoria's awareness, a new set of eyes was watching. Eyes that knew exactly who Nathan Cole was. The clink of ice in plastic cups rattled down the aisle as beverage service continued. Victoria Hayes moved with a mechanical efficiency, her smile turning on and off like a switch. When she reached row 14 again, the expression evaporated entirely. "Need anything else?" she asked flatly, eyeing the still half-full cup of water on Nathan's tray. Nathan shook his head. "Actually, could I get a sealed bottle of water? Just to have for later." Victoria's brows arched in mock surprise. "A sealed bottle? For Economy Plus? That's not how this works, sweetheart. Your parents probably paid for that seat, but the rules still apply." Her voice carried just enough for nearby passengers to hear. A couple in row 13 exchanged amused glances. Someone stifled a laugh. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. Nathan's expression didn't change. He didn't bristle, didn't bite back. His pale blue eyes met hers for a fraction of a second, cold, steady, unshaken. Victoria turned to 14B, the older woman, and produced a sealed bottle with a bright smile. "Here you go, ma'am." The woman hesitated before accepting, her smile awkward. She glanced at Nathan, a flicker of guilt passing across her face. From behind, the man in 15C shifted again, angling his phone just slightly. The faint glint of the metal card inside Nathan's hoodie caught the light as he adjusted his position. The atmosphere in row 14 was taut, the tension humming like a low electrical charge. At that moment, a movement in the aisle broke the static. A man in a sharp navy suit was making his way from the business cabin toward the rear galley. His presence was unremarkable, just another well-dressed passenger. But as he passed row 14, his gaze flicked to Nathan. It was brief, almost incidental, but there was a spark of recognition in his eyes. Nathan's head turned slightly, his expression neutral, but there was no mistaking the faint acknowledgement in that single glance. Victoria didn't notice. She was already pushing her cart down the aisle, satisfaction tightening her posture. In her mind, she had put the boy in his place. Polite, quiet, and contained. Nathan leaned back again, the same picture of calm. But behind that composure, the cold steel of patience remained. Around him, small currents were shifting. A stranger's glance, a hidden recording, a faint awareness building just beneath the surface. And Victoria, unaware she had already crossed an invisible line, was about to step straight into the storm. The aisles quieted as the first drink service wound down. Most passengers settled into their seats, conversations dropping into low murmurs. Victoria returned toward the front, passing row 14 again, her steps purposeful. Nathan, still calm, glanced up as she approached. His voice was level, polite, but the clarity in his tone cut through the hum of the cabin. "Ms. Hayes, could I get your full name for my notes?" Victoria stopped, momentarily caught off guard. Then a smirk tugged at her lips. "My full name? What are you, a travel blogger? Going to post a review about your tragic cup of water?" Her tone dripped with condescension, earning a few chuckles from nearby passengers who had only caught pieces of their earlier exchanges. Nathan didn't rise to it. Instead, he simply nodded once, almost as though confirming something to himself. Then he said quietly, "I think I may need to make a phone call." Victoria's smirk widened. "Oh, of course you do," she replied, leaning in slightly. "Go right ahead. Maybe you can complain to customer service while you're at it." Her tone was sarcastic, dismissive, her mind certain she had the upper hand. She moved on, tossing a perfunctory smile to another row. But not everyone in the crew shared her confidence. From the rear galley, a younger flight attendant named Marco had been keeping a discreet eye on the situation. When Nathan spoke those words, "I think I may need to make a phone call," Marco's gaze sharpened. He recognized something in the boy's tone, in the way he wasn't rattled. Nathan's posture was still relaxed, one elbow on the armrest, but there was an unspoken steadiness in the air around him. It wasn't the defiance of a rebellious teenager. It was the quiet certainty of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Marco hesitated for a moment before glancing toward the business cabin. His eyes briefly met the suited man who had passed earlier. A nearly imperceptible nod passed between them. Victoria, oblivious, continued her rounds. She saw only a passenger she'd successfully cowed into silence. Nathan, however, had shifted slightly in his seat, pulling the brushed metal card from his pocket and turning it slowly between his fingers, the faint light glinting off its surface. The move was casual, unhurried. But Marco noticed, and the realization unsettled him. Whatever Victoria thought she was in control of, Marco knew this wasn't over. And somewhere, in the quiet between the rows, the balance of power had just begun to tilt. Nathan waited until Victoria disappeared into the forward galley, her voice still carrying faintly as she spoke to another passenger. The hum of the engines was steady now, cruising altitude achieved. It was the perfect moment for silence and action. He pulled his phone from his pocket. The brushed metal card rested on the tray beside him for just a moment, almost invisible to anyone not looking for it. Then he opened a secure app, tapping a single contact marked Dad. 3,000 miles away, in a sleek Manhattan boardroom, Alexander Cole was deep into the most aggressive negotiation of the quarter, a high-stakes M&A discussion involving Aureus Air. His phone lit up with his son's name. He didn't hesitate. "Nathan," he said, voice low, controlled. On the other end, Nathan's tone was just as calm. "Hey, Dad, sorry to interrupt your meeting. I'm on flight 927. A pause. "There's been an incident with the lead flight attendant. It's nothing I can't handle, but it's bad. Public. Unnecessary." Alexander's eyes narrowed, his voice dropping into the measured cadence that had unsettled rivals for decades. "Tell me exactly what happened." Nathan recounted it in short, precise sentences. No embellishment, no emotion. By the end, there was a brief silence. "I see," Alexander said finally. "Stay in your seat. Don't speak to her again. I'll take care of it." The call ended. Nathan placed his phone face down, leaning back in his seat as if nothing had happened. In 15C, the man in the navy jacket, who had been subtly recording, shifted, watching Nathan with renewed interest. Meanwhile, in the business cabin, the suited man who had glanced at Nathan earlier discreetly checked his own phone. A news alert had just flashed across his screen. Rumors of a pending Aureus Air Fleet halt. His lips tightened into the faintest smile. He wasn't just any passenger. He was a representative of a rival airline involved in the same M&A negotiations Alexander was attending. And if Aureus Air stumbled, his company stood to gain enormously. Back in the rear galley, Marco noticed the change in the cabin. It wasn't loud, but there was a shift, a current he could feel. Nathan remained silent, expression calm. While hundreds of miles away, the first call from Alexander Cole's office went out. The order was simple: ground the entire Aureus Air fleet. It was a move that would ripple across the aviation world within minutes. And for everyone on Flight 927, it was about to become very, very real. In the cockpit, Captain Harris was mid-conversation with his first officer when a priority message flashed on the console. The header alone made his pulse quicken. Executive Directive, Aureus Air Ops. He read it once, then again, disbelief settling in. Immediate ground stop. All flights, all aircraft in operation to divert to the nearest suitable airport. Acknowledge. Beside him, the first officer frowned. That can't be real. A ground stop? Fleet-wide? Harris didn't answer right away. His experience told him that directives at this level weren't sent lightly, and never without a reason. After a long pause, he keyed the intercom. His voice, steady but weighted, filled the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've just received notice from operations that due to a critical IT systems failure, Aureus Air will be implementing a precautionary diversion. Flight 927 will not continue to San Francisco. We will be diverting to Denver. Estimated time to landing, 45 minutes. The cabin erupted in murmurs. The words "critical at failure" rippled through the rows like static. Most passengers looked confused, some irritated, a few pulling out their phones. In the business cabin, however, the reaction was different. The suited man from earlier, representative of a rival airline, leaned back slowly, his expression unreadable. He knew what kind of failures could trigger a ground stop, and 8 glitches rarely required such an immediate total response. Back in row 14, Nathan sat perfectly still, his face calm, eyes half focused on the clouds outside the window. To anyone watching, he appeared unaffected. Victoria, on the other hand, stiffened as she passed the announcement to passengers near her section. She didn't like surprises, and this was the kind of development that unsettled even seasoned crew. Marco, from the rear galley, watched her reaction carefully. He could feel the pressure shifting, invisible but undeniable. As passengers began discussing the news, snippets of conversation hinted at the unease spreading. An entire airline all at once? That doesn't sound like just it. I've flown for years, never seen anything like it. Phones lit up with notifications, some passengers already checking news outlets. So far, nothing official had surfaced. Victoria forced a professional smile, but her tone was clipped. Please remain calm, everyone. We'll have more information soon. No one noticed the way her glance lingered uneasily on 14A. High above the Rockies, Flight 927 continued its quiet course toward Denver, but tension had taken root in the cabin, winding through the rows like an invisible current. And for a few passengers, those who understood the implications, this was no routine diversion. This was the first visible ripple of something far more calculated. In the cockpit, another encrypted message appeared on Captain Harris's console. This one marked Priority 1. He opened it, eyes scanning quickly, and his breath caught for just a moment. Passenger 14A, Nathan Cole, son of Chairman Alexander Cole. Treat with full courtesy. Corporate security will meet the aircraft upon landing. Lead flight attendant subject to immediate review. Harris leaned back, the pieces clicking together in an instant. He had heard the name before, everyone in the company had. And now, the critical IT failure made perfect sense. He exhaled slowly, exchanging a quick glance with his first officer. Get ready for a very interesting landing, he murmured. Meanwhile, in the cabin, Victoria Hayes continued her routine as if nothing had changed. She had no idea what was moving just beyond her view. In the business cabin, however, another dynamic was unfolding. The suited rival executive from earlier discreetly pulled out his phone, typing a short message to a contact at a financial news outlet. Exclusive. Aureus air grounding entire fleet. Possible incident involving chairman's family. He hit send. Within minutes, the first whispers appeared on private industry channels. It was still contained, but not for long. Back in row 14, Nathan remained calm, gazing out the window as though Denver were simply another stop on his journey. He hadn't moved since his call to his father, but the quiet gravity around him had deepened. Marco, moving down the aisle, caught sight of Captain Harris stepping briefly out of the cockpit. Their eyes met, and Harris's subtle nod told Marco everything. The balance had shifted. Victoria passed them both, oblivious, her focus still locked on keeping passengers calm. But when she saw Harris quietly leaning in to say something to Marco, she paused mid-step, sensing a conversation she wasn't part of. In 15C, the man in the navy jacket, still recording, watched the small changes in body language like a hawk. He caught the faintest expression on Marco's face, half tension, half something else. The tension in the cabin was no longer just the passengers' confusion. Something invisible, sharp, was weaving its way toward a very public moment. By the time Flight 927 began its descent into Denver, the quiet storm had gathered enough force to break. Victoria still believed she was controlling her section, unaware that a chain of events had been set in motion, one that would place her at the center of an unfolding spectacle. And somewhere, a news alert had just been drafted, waiting for the moment the wheels touched the ground. The descent into Denver was smooth, but the mood in the cabin was anything but. Passengers sat tense, exchanging theories in low whispers. Victoria continued her rounds, still unaware of the full scale of what was waiting on the ground. As the aircraft touched down, the usual rush of relief was absent. Instead, there was a taut silence, broken only by the captain's voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. Security personnel will be boarding the aircraft shortly. Do not stand until instructed." Victoria frowned. Security boarding? That was unusual, especially for a diversion labeled as an IT failure. The aircraft rolled to a remote stand, far from the main terminal. The doors opened, and 3 figures in dark suits stepped inside. Their movements were precise, deliberate, exuding authority without a word. The lead man's eyes swept the cabin before focusing on row 14. "Mr. Cole?" His voice was low, respectful. Nathan stood calmly, slipping his backpack over his shoulder. Victoria's eyes widened slightly, the first hint of unease breaking through her professional mask. "Mr. Cole?" The suited man turned briefly, his gaze locking onto her. "Ms. Hayes?" She straightened instinctively. "Yes?" "I'm with the office of the chairman. Effective immediately, your employment with Aureus Air is terminated for gross misconduct. Your credentials are revoked. Please gather your belongings. You will be escorted from the property." Gasps rippled through the cabin. A passenger 2 rows back, already holding up his phone, had been streaming since the suits entered. His live stream captured every word. The calm removal of Nathan, the formal dismissal of Victoria, the stunned silence of the passengers. Victoria's face drained of color. This isn't..." But her protest faltered under the weight of the moment. The security detail stepped aside for Nathan to exit first. The camera phone panned, following the boy in the gray hoodie walking steadily toward the exit, the very image of quiet control. As the suits turned back to Victoria, she realized the full scope of what was happening. Not just a private reprimand. This was public, witnessed by a cabin full of passengers, and broadcast live to the world. The live stream viewer count was climbing rapidly. Even before the engines powered down, snippets of the clip were already spreading across social media. By the time Victoria stepped off the aircraft, escorted firmly but professionally, the video had reached thousands, and her name was becoming synonymous with the unfolding scandal. Justice for the passengers in row 14 had arrived before their seatbelts even unclicked. The moment Nathan stepped off Flight 927, the ripple became a wave. Within hours, news outlets picked up the viral clip of Victoria Hayes's public dismissal. By morning, Aureus Air ground stop was trending across major platforms. The stock market reacted instantly. Aureus Air shares opened to a sharp drop. Billions shaved off the company's market capitalization within minutes. Analysts filled airwaves, speculating on everything from internal chaos to a pending leadership shakeup. In Manhattan, Alexander Cole watched the numbers with calm precision. He was no stranger to volatility. His phone buzzed, another message from his M&A team. The rival consortium he had been negotiating with had sensed weakness. They were demanding a price cut, citing brand instability after the incident. For most executives, this would have been a nightmare. For Alexander Cole, it was an opening. He leaned back in his chair, listening to their pitch over speakerphone. The rival representatives spoke confidently, thinking they had the upper hand. Given the recent public challenges, we believe a revised valuation is appropriate, one said, his tone bordering on smug. Alexander waited a beat, then replied evenly, "Interesting perspective, but I see something different. Public perception is a temporary headwind. Operational control, however, is stronger than ever." The rival paused. "Stronger? With your fleet grounded?" Alexander's voice remained steady. "Grounding the fleet in under an hour demonstrates absolute operational authority. Investors notice that. So do regulators. The market will stabilize, and when it does, the valuation will return to my number, or higher." Silence followed. Meanwhile, back in Denver, corporate teams were moving with military precision. Press releases reframed the incident as part of a broader corporate culture reform. Training initiatives, diversity programs, and customer-first campaigns were launched overnight. Financial analysts, who had predicted a prolonged slump, began revising their projections as Cole Holdings pushed its narrative: swift action, clear leadership, systemic change. The rival consortium, realizing their leverage was slipping, attempted one last push to pressure Aureus Air. Alexander responded by casually delaying the negotiation, sending a clear signal he was not desperate. By week's end, Aureus Air's stock had rebounded partially, stabilizing as public sentiment shifted from outrage to cautious approval of the airline's decisive response. What had begun as a PR disaster was, in Alexander Cole's hands, becoming a calculated demonstration of control. For those watching from the outside, the turnaround was stunning. For those who knew Alexander, it was expected. By the third day after Flight 927's diversion, Victoria Hayes's face was everywhere. The video of her confrontation with Nathan, captured in perfect clarity from multiple angles, had gone viral. Clips were dissected on morning shows, talk panels, and podcasts. In one recording, her sharp tone over the bottle of water became a meme. In another, the moment she mocked Nathan about seats your parents probably paid for was paired with sarcastic captions. Social media thrived on it, remixing her words into songs, parodies, even merchandise. Aureus Air, meanwhile, announced her termination as part of a zero-tolerance policy for passenger mistreatment. That single phrase, zero tolerance, cemented her status in the public eye as the villain of the week. The airline industry moved quickly too. Internal memos circulated, quietly adding her name to informal "do not hire" lists. For Victoria, the doors to every major carrier closed overnight. Even budget airlines weren't willing to take the risk. And then came the call from a well-known cable news network. They offered a lucrative deal, an exclusive interview, a chance to tell her side of the story. The producer's voice was smooth, sympathetic. "We want to give you a platform to explain what really happened. The truth matters." Desperate, Victoria agreed. When the interview aired, the tone was anything but sympathetic. Clips of her past incidents, minor complaints buried deep in HR records, were presented alongside the viral video. The host's questions, carefully phrased, painted her as a repeat offender. "Were you under stress that day, Ms. Hayes? Or is this kind of behavior habitual?" The segment was a ratings hit. The network got exactly what it wanted: outrage, clicks, and engagement. Victoria got nothing but deeper public scorn. Back online, the response was brutal. Comment sections filled with jeers. Viewers clipped segments of the interview, turning her defensive answers into more memes. In quiet corners of aviation forums, industry insiders speculated how quickly her name had gone from an internal HR file to global infamy. "It's like she went from flight crew to case study overnight," one commenter wrote. For Nathan, watching from a distance, the spectacle brought no satisfaction. He had moved on. But for the public, this was still entertainment. And for Victoria, it was the collapse of everything she'd built. Her career wasn't just over, it was scorched earth, and the world had front-row seats to watch it burn. The dust from Flight 927's incident had barely begun to settle when Alexander Cole made his next move. Standing at a press conference flanked by Aureus Air executives, he unveiled a sweeping corporate reform: Fly with Dignity. The program promised mandatory respect and equity training for all employees, anonymous passenger feedback systems, and stricter oversight on crew conduct. The message was clear: Aureus Air would lead the industry not just in service, but in ethics. Reporters pressed for details. Was this a PR stunt to recover the brand? Alexander's calm reply silenced them. Aureus Air isn't just reacting. We're setting a new standard. The days of tolerance for disrespect in customer experience are over. Behind the scenes, Nathan was working quietly. With seed funding from Cole Holdings, he launched the Passenger Respect Initiative, a nonprofit watchdog that would partner with airlines to improve passenger treatment across the industry. Its annual Fly Fair rating promised to rank airlines on their equity and service scores, creating a new metric passengers could trust. Not everyone was pleased. A rival airline, sensing Aureus Air's vulnerability, reached out to Nathan's initiative with a proposal. They offered substantial funding and data sharing, but only if the Passenger Respect Initiative focused its scrutiny disproportionately on Aureus Air, amplifying every small misstep. It was a classic corporate ambush. Use the reform tool as a weapon against its own creator. Nathan listened politely. The rival executives assumed his youth made him naive, easy to sway. When they finished, he thanked them for their time and declined. "This initiative isn't about targeting one airline," he said firmly. "It's about improving the entire industry. If Aureus Air makes a mistake, we'll address it. But the same goes for you." The rival executives left frustrated, realizing the chairman's son wasn't a pawn. As the first Fly Fair report released, several airlines, fearing public shame, scrambled to adopt reforms. Aureus Air ranked high, bolstered by the changes Alexander implemented. Public opinion shifted. Industry analysts began to describe the incident as a turning point, not just for Aureus Air, but for commercial aviation as a whole. For Nathan, it wasn't about headlines or revenge. It was about turning a moment of humiliation into systemic change. And in choosing the harder path, he'd done more than protect his family's company. He'd reshaped the game entirely. 3 years passed. The scandal of Flight 927 had faded from headlines, living on only as a case study in aviation ethics and corporate crisis management. Nathan Cole, now 20, was a rising voice in both business and advocacy, his Passenger Respect Initiative gaining influence across the industry. One quiet October night, returning from a late conference, Nathan and 2 friends pulled off the interstate for gas. They stopped at a dimly lit travel plaza, the kind that stays awake for long-haul truckers and road-weary travelers. Inside, the smell of burnt coffee lingered. A woman in a worn uniform stood behind the counter, refilling a pump pot. Her hair was pulled into a tired bun, her name tag reading simply, Victoria. Nathan stepped up with 3 coffees. "3 black, please," he said casually. Victoria turned, her breath catching for a fraction of a second. She knew that voice. The boy in the gray hoodie, the one who had quietly dismantled her world, stood in front of her, older now, but unmistakable. Her pulse spiked, panic flaring. Would he recognize her? Call her out? Nathan, however, showed no sign of recognition. To him, she was just another night shift cashier. He smiled politely as she handed him the cups, paid, and turned back to his friends. No accusation, no gloating. As the door swung shut behind him, Victoria stood frozen, a strange cocktail of relief and humiliation flooding her. In that moment, she realized she wasn't even a villain in his story anymore, just a shadow in a life he had long since moved past. She thought that was the end of it. Then the door opened again. A man in a navy suit stepped inside, his presence oddly familiar. It was the same man from Flight 927's business cabin, the one who had glanced at Nathan all those years ago. He walked to the counter, meeting Victoria's startled eyes with a calm, assessing look. "Evening," he said evenly, buying nothing, then heading back out. Through the glass, Victoria saw him stop near Nathan's car, exchanging a brief word with him. Nathan nodded, as if acknowledging an old friend. Her breath caught again. The man wasn't just a random passenger, he was a corporate advisor, one who had been quietly ensuring Nathan's safety since that flight. As the car pulled away, Victoria felt the full weight of the years settle on her. Nathan's life had risen, shaped by purpose and growth. Hers had shrunk to the fluorescent-lit confines of a gas station counter. And as the taillights vanished into the night, the quiet justice of it all left her with nothing but the echo of her own choices.